I asked Joe to come here with me today. And by the way, I'm the feature speaker, but I feel like Joe is the feature speaker, and he's been on TED Talk, and he's built a bunch of successful companies, and it's really a privilege for me to be here with Joe today. And so I met Joe, and he introduced me to the BOSI test, not BOSI, but BOSI test. It's an entrepreneurial DNA test that you can take for free. And I love having people take tests in addition to all the personality stuff because they have some science behind them. So, Joe, I want to ask you today, first of all, you've built all these successful companies, and then you decided to start up BOSI. Tell us about that and kind of your background a little bit and why that's so important, and why did you decide to do that, and how the heck did you do that?
Yeah. So I just sold one of my companies in 2004. I was bored out of my mind and started working with entrepreneurs and started to discover something that I kind of intuitively knew for a long time, and many of you intuitively know, but I finally had some time to go look after it. And here's what it was. I got the sense that all entrepreneurs aren't the same, that we're not wired the same. Some of us have very different strengths and weaknesses than others, but no one had gone after it. There were personality assessments out there, DISC profiles, this, that, the other, but none of them were helping me understand the entrepreneurial wiring. What made you different as an entrepreneur than me? What makes Richard Branson very different than Bill Gates? What makes a Donald Trump very different than a Steve Jobs? They all look like billionaires, and we all assume they're the same, but they're wired completely differently. And their approach to business, their approach to decision making, the kind of teams they need to surround themselves with, were totally different. And so when we play that down to you and me, just everyday entrepreneurs, what I found over and over again was there was this one-size-fits-all approach to everything, to hiring, to sales strategy, to marketing strategy. So I just kind of went off on a little escapade of sorts, but just did some research. We studied over 1,000 entrepreneurs initially, and we discovered, Fred, if you can put up our screen, we discovered that entrepreneurs really fall in 4 very different behavioral profiles. And so that's where BOSI comes from. It's builder, opportunist, specialist, and innovator. And it's one thing for you as an entrepreneur in this room to know how you're wired. It's 10 times more effective to know how your talent is wired. Because you can look at a resume of a developer, and there may be some great things on the resume, but if you don't understand how they're wired as an entrepreneur, if you can't predict how they're going to think and how they're going to handle risk and how they see the world, it's going to be very hard for them to fit into your culture, so to speak. So
Okay.
We had Joanna's team go through this process, so let's talk more about that.
All right, well, it was very interesting. One of the things that I really love that Joe said to me that kind of struck with me is to figure out what your strengths are and build on those instead of like looking at your weaknesses. And this is where I say you should just hire the people to take care of all your weaknesses and continue to grow your strengths. And so, Joe, what I'd love for you to talk about today. So, by the way, anyone who wants to take one of these tests, you should just Google BOSI, BOSI.com, and then the test is out there for free in his TED Talk. But you take the test and you could read through it. But I'd really like for you, Joe, to explain what does the B and the O and the S and the I really represent, and if you could give us one example of what are the specific positions that would fall into those categories of each of these letters?
Yeah. So let's say you're sitting here and you're thinking to yourself, I really need a partner who's going to, or a key employee who's going to help me either scale the business or bring in new business or handle development. It really comes down to not just what their resume says and their background says, but also their pre-wiring. So anybody who shows up in our assessment process in what we call the builder quadrant, these are people who are pre-wired to scale businesses very, very quickly. So when I was studying entrepreneurs, we found that only about 13% of all entrepreneurs have this wiring, which is why a very small percentage of companies grow to 20, 30, 50, 100 million, 200 million and beyond. It's not about skill, it's about how you're wired, how you think, and how you make decisions. So this same wiring that's inside the entrepreneur, inside you and me, is also in your people. In the people you're going to hire, in the team you're going to build. So the question is, how are they wired? So anyone who shows up in that B category is going to be pre-wired to help you scale the business, take leadership roles, have huge P&L responsibility, really drive a lot of growth in the business and expansion. Anyone who shows up in the O quadrant is pre-wired to sell, to be a rainmaker. Anyone who shows up in the S quadrant is more going to be designed for the day-to-day operations, service, excellent client service. And then anyone who shows up in the I quadrant is pre-wired for innovation, to build game-changing product. So if we're looking, Joanna, if we're looking for someone as a developer, you and I have two choices. We can find a developer with S DNA, in which case they'll do a very decent job at taking the scope that I write up and write code around it, or I can look for a developer with iDNA who's going to build mind-numbing stuff that no one's ever thought of. There's a big difference between S developers and I developers, for example.
Yeah, absolutely. And so what would you say in terms of when you're hiring people, when they take this test, if you have operations manager, CIO of a company, can you talk a little bit about what type of, what the combinations are? Because I think that no one really falls into the category of one of these, right?
Yeah, so we're all a combination of a couple of these at least. And if some of you want to just throw out roles you're looking to fill in your companies, I can give you the formula.
Yeah, that would be actually a great idea. Is anybody here looking to hire?
But here's what I can do. If you're thinking, I need someone to go land clients, get deals, make it happen, and they don't show ODNA, it isn't going to happen. I can promise you that. It doesn't really matter what their resume says or what their past job performance was, because the interesting thing we found about entrepreneurial DNA is we morph. So this is not like a personality thing where if you're a controlling person, you're always a controlling person. People will literally morph out of opportunist DNA into specialist DNA like that. And that does not show up on resumes. That doesn't show up in interviews, because this is genuinely how this person thinks. And so again, when you're recruiting for Rainmakers, if your business plan to your investor says we're going to bring in 100 of these clients and 1,000 of those, you better make sure you've got some people with opportunist DNA doing that work.
So George can still keep his job?
Yeah, George. So when we assessed the MX team, and I saw George in the O quadrant, and he's leading the sales efforts, like perfect. He's wired for it. He's energized by it. Opening deals and closing deals is what he loves. It's who he is. And putting him anywhere else in the company would be a drain to him. There's a question coming right here.
Yes, sir.
So from a team perspective, when you're starting off, when you can't necessarily afford to hire full-time people or even part-time people, the best thing to do is figure out where you are. Are you a specialist? Are you an innovator? Are you an opportunist? Or are you a builder? And then go cross-quadrant and fill that gap as fast as you can. So for example, if you're showing innovator DNA, you've come up with something game-changing, right? A new idea, a new concept, and you're pretty excited about it. The most likely person you need to surround yourself with right away is a builder, because that builder will bring a level of strategy that's very different than your approach. And it's that combination that becomes game-changing. So if you look at Google, it's a combination of an innovator-builder combination, and any one of them doesn't. So if you're a specialist and you're coming out of years and years of expertise, and you've built expertise in something, software or human resources or finance or whatever it is, and now you've got your idea for a business, you need to team up with an opportunist as fast as you can. That should be your first step. Yeah. Whoever the opposite is of where you are on the quadrant.
And I think this is what I was trying to say earlier, that I didn't have a lot of the experience or some of these skill sets, and I just surrounded myself with people who did. Because no, I don't think anyone is 4 of these, are they, Joe?
Very rare, but most of us are a primary and a secondary. Like we've got a dominant and something secondary.
Okay.
Yep.
Any other questions? Okay.
So the only last thing I'll share, and then we'll wind down here, is whether you're looking for your co-founder role or whether you're looking for key employees or even advisors, just know that this becomes just a really neat tool. It's free. Just take advantage of it, and I think it'll give you a lot of insight into who you are, how you're wired, what your strengths and weaknesses are, and then also who you need to have on your team. When we looked at Joanna's team, it's a very balanced team, which is a very, very good sign. Most companies end up looking like that. So this is a case study of a company. This isn't Joanna's company, but when you tend to be a specialist, you tend to attract a lot of specialists, and you start giving them roles that are not specialist roles. So for example, in this particular image, you'll see all those red dots. Those are people in this particular company that were in customer service, client service, help desk kind of roles. So they're perfectly suited for the roles they're in. The brown dots represent the management team, and the blue dots, this is the red flag, the blue dots was the sales team. Look at how many blue dots there are in the S quadrant. And this company, the frustration the owner had was he said, we're not growing, we're not bringing in new business. We've got happy clients, but we're not scaling the way we are supposed to, and we seem like we're out of fresh ideas. And look at what's in the B quadrant where the scale comes from, and look at the I quadrant where all the fresh ideas come from. They've got great client service, very limited new business. So as you look at building your company, you want to watch out for it starting to morph towards your DNA, because that's the natural tendency for us to recruit people who think and act like us entrepreneurs.
And I totally agree with you. And again, I will repeat what I said earlier about doing the team interview, because I find that, that saying birds of feather flock together. So I love to hire people just like me, because we get along really well. We're in agreement all the time. So I bring in a team of people so that they can say, no, Joanna, we really need a B, and you're trying to get that S again, okay? Because that's not the position we're trying to fill. We're not going out for drinks after work. We really need that person here 9 to 5 or longer to help us grow this business. So, when Joe's telling you that you're looking at these 4 quadrangles, it's so important, and that's why I think the interview process, in terms of like this personality testing, the interview, and also technical testing for IT positions. One thing I didn't mention earlier, but Brian actually developed a test for us that it's not a test that you get from an online company, but it asks, hey, build us this application. So if you own a pet store and you need to check pets in and out, and you've got a schedule, calendar, and all that, and the test takes 4 hours to do. And it's amazing how many people we disqualify who just don't even want to take the test because they're intimidated by it. And the ones that do, we could really see the code and what their development style is, and how neat they are, and what tools they might have used. And we give them pretty broad range of instructions, and then they come back to us with their kind of creativity back. So that's another thing we do that I think it's so important in addition to all this.
Yeah. So let me quickly recap, and then if there's any final questions, great. If not, we'll wind down. But for those of you that came in towards the end, the recap is this. There's an art to recruiting rockstar talent, and then there's a little bit of the science to it. On the art side, it's just a matter of not using the traditional, I'm just going to post on a job board strategy, right? Mm-hmm. It's more about really looking at recruiting talent as a marketing effort rather than an HR effort. Yeah. And really putting it out to your network, and never stop recruiting, even when there aren't job positions to fill, always be recruiting. The other thing I learned from you today is that really screen for passion and attitude and dedication up front. And one of the best ways to do it is to have multiple people in the room during the interview. That was an aha for me. Usually when we've interviewed, we've always done it one-on-one. But having other teammates, and if you don't have teammates, a friend, a family member, somebody to get that other perspective on a person coming through, that was pretty powerful. And then there's the science side of just putting them through assessments, giving them tasks to do, check them for how hard they're willing to work before they come to work for you, before you make the investment into them. Any closing thoughts, Joanna, as we finish up?
I just sometimes go by simple things I learned as a child. And when you're hiring people, make sure that they smile, that you could just feel the excitement from them, and that this isn't just some transitional thing for them. Really just take a step back for a moment when you're interviewing them, and make sure that you feel that passion and that desire. Don't try and hire someone because you have an open position and that you're desperate, because there's nothing worse than investing all that time into a person and 3 months later they quit and you have to go through this again. So the most important thing for me is take that time up front and make sure you feel 100%. Don't make up excuses for yourself on why you think that person has potential. We all know through the dating scene of what potential means. Okay, that's it.
All right. Well, thanks, everyone. Joanna's going to stick around to answer questions if you want to come meet her or some of her staff members. Thanks for being here.